thank you for joining the live discipleship discovery. I really do appreciate it. I ask that you would, and I've mentioned this before, if you would leave a comment or a like below, that would be great. It does help out with the channel. It helps out with getting the word out and getting other people to watch these videos. But that will greatly help with the content on this channel. So without further ado, I had mentioned that if you pay attention to the title, I'd said that no ignorance is no longer bliss. And I'm going to be focusing on one particular passage that we tend to take out of context. I mean, and when I say take it out of context, I mean, it is really taken out of context. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't even call it taken out of context. We immediately just insert something into it. And, it's kind of like, saying the title of the book is Mary Had a Little Lamb, but we turn around and say something, I don't know, Melvin had a little lamb or something. We just insert something in there and we just run with it. And it's one of those verses that we hear it come across the pulpit a whole lot. We see it. We hear this particular passage that is quoted. I say quoted. I use that very lightly, and it's completely quoted wrong. So, without further ado, let's jump right into it and let's find out what this whole ignorance thing is about. So, what we're going to do is we're going to start with that particular verse, and that particular verse is none other than John 10:10. Yeah. So John 10:10 is that verse that, when we're going through something or when the preacher wants to get everybody riled up and, and get everybody getting mad at Satan and the devil, whichever name or title you want to call him, we tend to say, the devil comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And we immediately just take thief out and throw Satan in, throw the devil in, throw the adversary in, throw whatever title you want to give him. We throw him in there, okay? But what we're going to do tonight, we're going to go through and we're going to look at what this actually means in context, okay? As always, we're going to stick straight to Bible and we're going to look at what it actually says. And I do highly recommend that you have your Bible, whether it's electronic or even if it is a physical Bible. Please do have that ready so that you too can also look at it for yourself. Okay, so let's jump right into it. So John 10, which is where this verse is found, but as always, when you're reading, you want to keep things in context. So what I want to do is I want to actually go back to chapter 9, and we're not going to go through and read everything in chapter 9. So just hold your horses. But I just wanted to at least show you the title of chapter 9 and to kind of give a real high level synopsis of chapter 9. There's a young man that Jesus heals him as far as his blindness is concerned. A lot of different things take place in between, as far as when he heals him, but then after he heals him, the Pharisees come on the scene, or they start to ask questions. And this is a man that's been born blind. He was blind from birth. Jesus heals him. The Pharisees come through and they're asking him a whole bunch of questions like, who is this man? Are you one of his disciples? And then the man turns and asks him the same question. But what I want you to focus on is in chapter 9 is that we're talking about a physical blindness, okay? Keep that in mind as far as this young man. It's a physical blindness, all right? Now, after Jesus heals the man, the Pharisees began to mock him in so many words and talk against him. And eventually they basically put him out, right? And that's when Jesus comes along. And let me actually scroll down to that particular section here, which is actually going to be starting at verse 35. Okay. And verse 35 says, Jesus heard that they had put him out, and finding him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered, "Who is he, Lord, that I may believe in him?" Jesus said to him, "You have both seen him, and he is the one who is talking with you." And he said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshiped him. And Jesus said, "For judgment I came into this world, so that those who do not see may see, and that those who see may become blind." Those of the Pharisees who were there or who were with him heard these things and said to him, "We are not blind too, are we?" And Jesus says to them, "If you were blind, you would have no sin. But since you say we see, your sin remains." Now, as I mentioned to you before, I want you to take note of the physical blindness of the man. But notice how Jesus comes through and he says that the Pharisees are blind. Now, they're not physically blind, but he's talking about spiritually blind. Okay. So notice how the gentleman goes from physical blindness to not being blind. And maybe for a little split second there was a little bit of spiritual blindness, but he was accepting of what? The truth, which is Jesus Christ. However, the Pharisees, on the other hand, they're spiritually blinded. They don't want to give Jesus the time of day. Throughout the whole entire Gospels, they're going back and forth with him, asking him various different questions and all those different things, okay? Now, before we go into chapter 10, what I want to do is I want to kind of move over to another section, of the Gospels to kind of give a little bit of context before we get into chapter 10. And it eventually is going to make perfect sense, okay, as far as what John 10:10 is really talking about or who it's talking about. So let me go to Matthew 23. Now, this particular chapter or these verses, Jesus is going through and he's given a lot of different woes to the Pharisees, okay? And between verses, I think it's it starts with verse 13 and goes all the way down to, I believe it's, let's see, what is the other verse there? It is going to be down to verse 26, and Jesus actually calls them blind 5 times, okay? And he goes through and tells them all these different woes about various different things that they're doing that's wrong, and how they're treating them and how they're stuck on their own laws per se. And even in John 9, they even say that they follow Moses. They believe in Moses. They believe what he said. They believe that Moses heard from God, which is true. However, they didn't realize this was God in the flesh in front of them. They were not accepting of it because they were spiritually blind. Okay. Now, what I want to bring your attention to as far as Matthew 23 is actually the very first verse, which is in verse 13 that you see on your screen here. It says, "But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you shut off the kingdom of heaven from people, for you do not enter in yourselves, nor do you allow those who are entering to go in." Meaning, you're doing a whole bunch of stuff. You're very legalistic, and you really don't know what you're talking about. You're just throwing stuff out. And he goes on to tell them that they're placing things on their shoulders and so to speak, and making it heavy for them, being just really being very legalistic. Okay. But going back to John 10. Let's go back there for a second. Let's start going into chapter 10. We're going to start with verse 1. And it says, "Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter by the door into the fold of the sheep, but climbs up some other way, he is a thief and a robber." A little bit of context. The door, which we're going to see, he's going to say this later on, starting in verse 7, that he is the door. Okay. Now, notice how it mentions that anyone who climbs in any other way, they are the ones who are a thief and a robber. Verse 2, "But he who enters by the door is a shepherd of the sheep. To him the doorkeeper opens, and the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he puts forth all his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice." Take note of what Jesus is saying. You have this shepherd, basically a shepherd that is a wolf in sheep's clothing, right? That's so-called leading people. And Jesus is clearly stating, my sheep know my voice. And they know when I say something, they know when I'm speaking. Okay. And he's doing a comparison of himself also being the door, but also he's the good shepherd, which he's going to say that even more so later on, that he leads his sheep to the truth. Okay. Which is the same thing that a preacher, pastor, teacher, whoever, they're supposed to lead the flock down the right path or focus on moving more towards Christ. Okay. But unfortunately for the Pharisees, this is not what they're doing. Okay. You remember the physical blindness, but also spiritual blindness. Okay. So let's continue on. Let's see here. Where was I? Okay. So let's go back to verse 3. "To him, the doorkeeper opens, and the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he puts forth all his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. A stranger they simply will not follow, but will flee from him because they do not know the voice of strangers." Okay. Imagine listening, and some of you can probably attest to this. When you hear certain people that are teaching, preaching, whatever, you immediately know, yeah, no, I'm not going to listen to that person, or that person doesn't know what they're talking about, or they're putting out a false gospel. Okay. If you're able to do that, consider yourself sheep. Now, if you don't know, you're just as blind as the person that's behind the pulpit. Okay, let's continue reading. Verse 6. "Now, after he goes through, and he typically, how a lot of his parables go, he will give a parable. At the end of it, they don't understand it. So Jesus now has to go through and just say, okay, since you didn't understand, let me just lay it out for you. So verse 6 says, "This figure of speech, Jesus spoke to them, but they did not understand what those things were which he had been saying to them. So Jesus said to them again, 'Truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers.'" I want you to take note of the words that are being used. They're plural. Okay. Satan is one. Jesus is saying all those who came before me are thieves and robbers, plural. Okay. But the sheep did not hear them. Even back then in the Old Testament, before Jesus comes onto the scene, they didn't listen to him because they were God's sheep. Verse 9, I am the door. If anyone enters through me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. Verse 10, the thief, remember the thieves and the robbers earlier, the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. Okay. The thing we got to take note of is anyone who claimed to profess another way as far as salvation, they're basically robbing people of the truth, is what's taking place here. This is what Jesus is talking about. He's stating that if they're going to be putting forth something that is not true and is not leading you down the right path, which is to the truth, which is Jesus Christ, because Jesus makes it very clear in John 14:6 that he is what? The way, the truth, and the life. The Pharisees here and the Sadducees and the scribes, they were spiritually blinded. The thief here, he's talking about the Pharisees, the scribes, the Sadducees, the Jewish leaders. That's who he's talking about. He's talking about false teachers. Now, we've all come in contact or have heard people that claim that they've been preaching the gospel for 40, 50 years, okay? And sometimes, and I'll say this, you are, as a teacher, you are going to make some mistakes because it is a learning process. But it takes someone who has the heart for God's people to recognize, hey, I got XYZ wrong. Let me go back and correct that because this is something that is important. Now, if it's someone that just continues on, then you automatically should know that this person is that thief. Okay. Now, going back to the fact of when I mentioned about ignorance is bliss, is no longer bliss. There are a lot of people that say this, and I'll be the first to say I've done this before myself. I would say Satan only comes to kill, steal, and destroy. Okay, without realizing it, I'm just basically going based on what someone else has said, and I take it and I run with it. But here's the kicker. The person that I hear saying that, and I'm specifically talking about the teachers and the preachers and on this, as far as this is concerned, it's almost as though they're deflecting who the true thief is. And I want you to think about that for a second. By them saying something, because they build that trust that they understand, they know it, they may just take one particular verse and they stay on that one verse and they just find all different types of ways to switch it around, stretch it and shape it up and all kinds of stuff and, get people riled up. And he says, well, Satan comes to only kill and steal and destroy. And he's talking about your situation and gets you all hyped up. But at the end of it, you don't realize that is the thief that's telling you that. Hence the reason why ignorance no longer is bliss. It's, in this case, it's in the red and black. If you have an all black letter Bible, it's in black and white. It says the thief. It doesn't say Satan, doesn't say the adversary, and it definitely doesn't say anything else besides the thief. Okay. I hate to sound, I'm not trying to sound condescending, but it is kind of a shame that it has been a tradition that we would take something that somebody else has said, and we just run with it and we plop in what we want to satisfy, I don't know, our feeling or be able to point the blame at someone else. Now, we seem to also forget there's a whole lot of stuff that Satan cannot do. Because again, when we focus so much, and I said this before, when we focus so much on Satan, we don't realize that we talk about him more than we talk about Christ. So therefore, anytime something happens in our lives, we want to start pointing the finger at Satan. Whereas we're probably dealing with those things because we probably put ourselves in that situation. Let's be honest. And then sometimes things just happen. And a lot of times God has taken us through certain things in order to mold and shape us. That's just a part of being a Christian. Get over it. That's just what it is. Okay. Um, but we cannot sit here and just plop stuff in as though, we're theologian. It says what it says. It's not Satan. Okay. Um, Furthermore, I want everyone to understand this, and I'm pretty sure this is probably going to be the shortest discipleship discovery or whatnot. But I wanted to bring this to light because reading and comprehension is simple. Just open it up and just read it. So hopefully, moving forward, when you hear somebody say the devil, Satan, and whatever names they want to give him, only comes to kill, steal, and destroy, you can almost 9 times out of 10 bet they probably haven't even opened up God's word, which means it's kind of hard to say that you are a sheep if you don't know God's voice. And how do we know his voice? Right here. That's how we know. That's the only way we're going to know that it is him speaking. But if we're plopping stuff in and doing what we want with the scriptures, we can be definitely on that path of destruction, which is what Jesus says here himself, saying, if you're sitting under someone that is not telling you the truth, and again, you won't know the truth unless you read, you're on that path. You're being stolen from. You're on the path of your spirit or whatnot, whatever it is you want to put up on the kill. It's getting destroyed. Okay. And you're on a path that you don't realize. It's time out for being ignorant when it comes down to reading God's word. And for those of you who get in a tiffy or whatever, as far as me using the term or the word ignorant, it just simply means not knowing something. And I'm actually trying to be nice when I say ignorant. But if you think about it, if you have the book, it only makes sense to read it. But anyway, but yeah, it's time out for it. I mean, this is probably one of the ones that probably bugs me the most after I have read it. It probably bugs me the most, and I'm sure and it doesn't necessarily mean that it has to bother somebody else. But I wanted to bring to light the fact that when you hear someone say this, it should make your ears go up and say, I wonder have they really read it, because it doesn't say Satan. I hope this quick lesson has helped you. And I ask, please like this video. Also, leave a comment below with your thoughts or even with questions that you may have. If you don't want to do that, I would prefer that you leave a comment below. But if you have somewhat of a private question or whatnot, you're more than welcome to send a question to questions@valuemysoul.com. That's all I have for you tonight. Be blessed. Love you. And so does God. Good night.